I wanted to tell you about my experience last summer. I'm fortunate enough to have a larger house and a little bit of land to go with it, so I'm kind of an outdoor freak. Having a very successful career has allowed me to have multiple trailers and a work truck as necessary. In one of the trailers, I keep my 2 dogs, a Rottweiler German Shepherd mix named Yogi, and my other dog, Ralph, who's an Irish Wolfhound. 2 total sweethearts. I have a really nice area set up for them and plenty of food and water. They really enjoyed it in there. They usually just spend a lot of time sleeping and lounging around, but I only keep them in there when I'm gone. Whatever happened that night, whatever thing came, I believe killed my dogs and took them. This evening I was taking my woman out to dinner and a movie, and we ended up going out to the bar for a couple of beers afterward. We came back to the house really late. It was well after midnight since we left the bar around 10. As I'm pulling up the street to get to my house, I look to see some distorted, torn metal on the top of one of my trailers. What the? My girlfriend actually pointed it out first and immediately said that somebody had broken in. I pulled my truck over immediately and ran up my driveway. It was worse than I thought. There were pieces and chunks of torn up metal with blood on them lying on the ground. It looked like metal pieces of a car that would fly off in the head-to-head collision. Mangled, bent, and destroyed. I was near on having a panic attack when I realized I didn't hear my dogs. I quickly unlocked the door and flung it open, and my heart stopped in my stomach. My dogs were nowhere to be found, but there was blood and fur everywhere on the floor, along with more pieces of bloody, shredded up metal. It reeked like wet dog, blood, and death. I look up and there's a gaping hole in my ceiling, easily large enough for Andre the Giant to fit through. It was a mess. I had a mental breakdown. My girlfriend was freaking the hell out, crying hysterically. So I called the police and told them that there was a break-in, and my dogs went missing. I was panicking so hard on the phone with the 911 operator, she could hardly understand me. A cop came pretty quickly, and I showed him what happened in my trailer, and told him I had no idea what happened. I just don't understand why there's no signs of my dogs anywhere. Just tufts of their fur and blood. I didn't even know if it was their blood. What the hell kind of animal is strong enough to tear into a trailer, grab 2 large dogs, kill them, and eat them, and then leave? If that is what happened, I didn't know. I'll never forget the look on his face when he took in the scenery inside the trailer. He went pale and started acting really nervous. He was stuttering and being really fidgety and told me he needed to step away real quick and make a quick phone call. He was on the phone for about 10 minutes when he comes back to tell me he's going to take some information down, but it was probably just a bear who broke in and was hungry. I flipped out on him, telling him what kind of bear rips through the top part of a metal trailer and devours 2 large-sized dogs. He never gave me a direct answer, just ended things with, "I'm just going to write this down as a bear attack and you need to be careful next time." Bullshit. I never heard anything else from the police department. His tone and demeanor scared me when he was taking down notes. It's like he knew something, and he kept telling me it was just a bear and that I shouldn't worry. Although he and I both seemed to clearly understand it was impossible for a bear to have done this magnitude of damage. I didn't get any sleep that night, or for the next few. I had just got rid of the trailer within a week and had it scrapped. I did put up flyers though, hoping somewhere my dogs would show up, but they never did. It was pretty traumatizing what happened to me. I'll never forget it. What I still don't understand is, with that kind of carnage, the police should have done more. I don't know what to think. I've been talking to my grandmother recently about Bigfoot. Weird creatures and things that just can't be explained. She's never shared this story with really anyone because no one she's known has shown interest in those subjects, and she didn't want to feel crazy for telling her account. It took some convincing, but I got her to tell me the whole story of what happened to her on the farm she grew up on back in the 1940s. Before I tell you what her actual account is, I'll say that she is still a very coherent woman. No illness, no dementia. She is sharp as a tack still and is a very do-it-yourself, independent kind of woman. She's really getting up there in age and is still very mobile and healthy. She doesn't make up stories like this and simply has no reason to. On with what she told me. Back in 1940 and 1941, my grandmother and her father and family owned a small farm south of Springfield, Missouri. The family specialized in growing lots of vegetables, including but not limited to corn, tomatoes, onions, spinach, potatoes, beets, carrots, and more. World War II hadn't quite happened yet, and we're just reaching the tail end of the Depression, with the economy starting to pick back up again, from what she remembers. Things started to happen on her parents' farm. She remembers hearing these scary howling sounds way outside in the woods and around the farm at night. She said the most frightening thing about all of it was how her father reacted to it. He was a tough man and had been through a lot and knew how to handle a gun. Whatever was making those noises really put fear into him. She says as the nights grew on, she would start hearing the howling noises coming closer and closer to the house. The family had a golden retriever that went missing shortly around this time. No trace of the dog. Livestock began disappearing too, and events occurred that required the police to get involved. In the coming weeks, 2 of the hired ranchers disappeared without a trace. The police were being called in and determined both persons to be missing, and her parents were actually going to be charged with the murder and disappearance of these 2 individuals. It was later dropped when they were just determined them to be missing, and there was no foul play afoot. This all happened in a short span of time, when it got so bad they were forced to move. Her father and family lost a great farm. She never really knew what it truly was until she was a little older. Her father would never tell her what it was that terrorized their farm, but my grandmother, even at an early age, knew it was something that really scared her just from what she had heard. My great-grandfather, my grandmother's father, passed away before I was ever born. Sometime on his deathbed, he told her about why the farm was given away and sold. He told her he believed a hellhound had come to take away their farm. This is where it gets pretty intense. She says that her grandfather had made a pact with a very powerful and renowned witch in New Orleans. This individual practiced hoodoo, which is basically demonology, and other various forms of black magic. Apparently, her grandfather made some sort of deal with him to pay this witch for power. Well, he ripped off the witch bad and took back most of his money somehow, so the witch casted demons to come after him as revenge, and his family. 2 years later, he went dead broke and ended up committing suicide. My grandmother's father was only just a boy when this happened, and was primarily raised by his mother. He explained to her that he thinks the same demons were coming after him, the same ones that sent his father to financial ruin and suicide. They supposedly manifested as hellhounds, he called them. They stood on 2 legs, were very large, the size of a moose if it stood on 2 legs, he said. Solid black with red glowing eyes. It looked more wicked and grotesque than a wolf. The way it looked at you told you it wanted to hurt you. It was straight from hell. My grandmother recounts her father getting very shaken up as he's explaining this to her. This terrified my grandmother because she had no idea even half of this was a reality at all. My great-grandfather passed away shortly thereafter. The weird thing is, my grandmother has had reoccurring nightmares with the same demon he told her about. Some nightmares it would be chasing her. Others it would get her and eat her alive. There were others, but she didn't really give me details. She said as she's gotten older, she's had them less and less, but they still happen from time to time. She's a Catholic, so I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it. I believe there is a dogman killing all my pigs and I have no idea what to do about it. I have a little house here, out in the backwoods, and my husband and I own several acres of thickly wooded game land. I love having this area because I love to raise and rescue pigs in need. I have downsized in the past couple years and, until recently, only had a litter of 6 young pigs. They have a good-sized pen out back, and I let them out every day in free roam. It's been exceptionally warm for winter this year, so I've been letting them out more and more every day. Now, they're all dead. I suspect it might be a dogman, or a possible Bigfoot taking my pigs. I don't know what other conclusion to come to. No other known predator does what it did to my pigs. About a month prior to now, I had noticed 2 of my pigs missing from the litter. This was odd. It's impossible for them to leave their pen. There is no way they can get out. My heart was racing. I thought someone had broken in and stole 2 pigs out of my pen in the night. I didn't even hear anything, not once. I am a light sleeper, so I would know if something was going on with my pigs. As I was walking away from the pen, going to look for them, I noticed a faint trail of blood that led off towards the woodline. I expected the worst. A bear or something probably got to them, I thought. I approached the woodline, and not even 10 feet, I saw both of them, hanging 30 feet up in a big fir tree. They were disfigured from being smashed against the tree, their intestines strewn throughout the branches they were on, and blood had drained from them entirely. Blood was all over the base of the tree, with blood running down the tree from the scene of gore above. The sight alone made me retch right there on the ground. I knew we had a cougar or bear that was doing this. When my husband arrived home later from work, I had him investigate the mess, and he looks at me, pale as a ghost, and says no cougar or bear are going to store their food that high in a tree, let alone kill the pigs the way it was. My husband, partially climbing and using a ladder, got both of the bodies down to bury. It was worse than I thought. It looked to be that these pigs were slammed up against a tree so hard they popped. The amount of force these pigs were killed with was disturbing. Both eyes on both pigs looked to be popped out from pressure. Some even had teeth missing. Their torsos were completely blown out and smashed. We looked closely and couldn't find any signs of them being eaten on. Even the tree base that was soaked in blood looked a little deformed from how hard these pigs were thrown up against this tree. What kind of predator does that to its prey? My husband and I were scared shitless. I needed to find out what we were dealing with. We set up game cams all around the pen and bear traps disguised under brush. The next few nights were uneventful. I mourned the loss of my 2 piglets, but continued to take care and love the other 4. I kept a pistol holstered to my hip and my husband's rifle right by the door. I began to not get good feelings being outside, constantly felt watched and observed by someone. I would look around, even sometimes grabbing my husband's rifle with the scope and searching around, just to see if I could see something. I never did see anything, but the feelings were still there. Things continued like this for about 10 more days when I came out the next morning to a gruesome scene. The door that was on the pin was torn off and thrown away about 50 feet from the pin. The actual metal gating of the door was torn. Blood, guts, and pieces of what was left of my 4 pigs laid all over the place. It looked like a slaughterhouse. I sobbed so hard. I screamed and cried for my husband to come home and that we were in danger. Keep in mind the ominous feelings never ceased. My husband came home and about shat himself at the sheer amount of blood and gore in the pen. He was scared and kept telling me no animal does this. Those pigs weren't even eaten. They were just torn into shreds. Again, I never heard anything while I slept during the night. This was done silently. My husband called the police. An officer arrived and took a look at the scene himself. told us this was a bear attack, that we were irresponsible enough to leave food out to attract a bear to lead to this, and left. Told us not to call the police again and waste their time over trivial affairs. My husband was so angry, he got into it with a cop for a good 5 minutes and almost got himself arrested. That's a whole other story. I never recovered from losing my pigs, and my husband and I have no idea what it could actually be, but I have my ideas. I spent some time doing homework and trying to find out what attacks livestock and kills like that. I somehow stumbled upon Bigfoot. I haven't put much thought into the whole Bigfoot idea, but after listening to multiple stories involving Bigfoot and animals, it seems like these things take animals. Then I ended up hearing about Dogman and listening to that. I checked out several different videos of these stories, some of them actually being yours, and I had no idea these things kill like they do. I'm beginning to worry that the feelings of being watched and our pigs going missing is a sign they're in the area. My husband doesn't believe it, and I can't entirely say I do either, but it does explain a lot. We still feel uncomfortable outside. We still feel like we're being watched. Every time we leave the house, we haven't seen anything, or anything yet. I'll let you know, but for now, we're going to get more firepower, just in case. Hey, I have something very interesting that just happened to me the other day. I'm a stay-at-home dad, so I'm able to be home with my wife and kids during the day. I have an upstairs office in which I work from. I had come down to assist my wife with making lunch for us and the kids, and I was holding our baby daughter. Our daughter was getting quite fussy, so I thought I would take her outside since it was a beautiful day. You wouldn't believe it, but it's been the warmest it's ever been during the winter. We're starting to see buds on all the plants. In fact, I think spring is coming early. It's warm enough that I step out in shorts and a shirt. Maybe we're just acclimated to the weather, but it feels like a cool spring day. My daughter immediately calms down once we're outside, and she's looking around, enjoying the sun and fresh air. We're just standing there on the porch, soaking in all the air, when I'm like, "Come on," to my daughter, decide to walk off into my wraparound driveway towards my woodshed with her in my arms. As I do, I can see off to the field to my right. This field isn't visible from my porch since I have my car parked in the way, and there's another shed blocking the vision. The scenery is breathtaking when you look out onto the field, because in the background, you can see the mountains. As I'm looking out into the field, I see this big black animal slowly walking through the open woods. It was huge. It was walking funny too, and I had no idea what I was looking at. This was several hundred yards away, and I was barefoot, basketball shorts and a shirt, with my infant daughter in my arms. I wasn't going to try and run closer to get a better look, but in hindsight, maybe I should have. It wasn't going into the woods more, it was just walking along the woodline. I don't think it saw me. It never looked over in my direction. It had a huge hunch in its back, but reminded me physically of a large black wolf, at least from the outline. I thought it was strange since we don't have any animals out here that big, besides elk, deer, cow, you name it. I went back inside and told my wife about it, and even she's intrigued. Who knows what it could have been? I am an avid upland bird hunter who lives in Oregon. I have a Flushing dog I train to hunt, an English setter, Reggie, who I take out most weekends of the hunting season to look for pheasant, quail, grouse, partridge, or ducks. For the last 3 years, the only meat I've eaten from mid-September through the end of January has been the birds my dog and I hunt, plus the elk or deer that I usually bag in during archery season. It's something I've become pretty passionate about. 2 weekends ago was the end of quail, grouse, and partridge season, so I planned a day trip out to eastern Oregon. For those who don't know, most of Oregon is essentially a desert. The area between the Cascade Mountains and the Pacific is rainy and forested, and what most people think of when they picture Oregon. However, with the exception of a few small mountain ranges, 2/3 of the state east of the Cascades is just sagebrush, red rocks, and arid country for hundreds of miles to the Idaho border. While quite cold this time of year, it's still amazingly beautiful, with literally millions of acres of public land, where there's great bird hunting. I loaded Reggie and my gear in the truck early Saturday morning, several hours before sunrise, and set off. Just at first light, we got to a big open river valley. I've spent lots of time exploring, but this specific area was new to me. It was about 30 degrees, looked like a light dusting of snow the night before, but otherwise pretty dry, and would be a fairly clear day. I love these moments, maybe more than anything in life. Being the only human in a massive wild landscape without a single trail or building for miles. The isolation, the giddiness for the upcoming adventure, the feeling of exploring an area that looked the same 500 years ago, the feeling of going out to get my own food, the contrast between hot coffee in my thermos and cold winter wind on my exposed hands. All of it. Just my favorite place to be. I got the dog ready, put on my boots and pack, loaded the shotgun, and we set off along the top of the valley ridge, 600 to 700 yards above the river, looking out over the arid, cold landscape, hued by the silvery blue wolf light of early winter mornings. For those who've never seen it, watching a hunting dog work is a truly fascinating spectacle to behold. It's honestly why I enjoy upland bird hunting so much. To me, watching a really good hunting dog actively hunt for wild game birds is honestly not that much different from watching a trained dolphin or sea lion at SeaWorld or something like that. A work dog doing its job can be so focused and intelligent, it's shocking sometimes. I trained Reggie well, but so much of it is primal and innate. It's Reggie's 6th hunting season, so we've spent hundreds of days off trail exploring the backcountry, and we've really learned to read each other well. Coastal rainforests, high desert, alpine mountains, hardwood forests, farmland, swamps, marshes. We've adventured through it all together. If there's a game bird near, Reggie sells it. I can tell from how his tail moves, the frequency of sniffing, and the lateral angles of his turns. I can tell if he smells another person from how he looks back at me. I can tell if he smells a coyote, wolf, bear, or mountain lion from how he drops his spine. I can tell if he smells an elk, deer, or moose from how he tilts his head to catch the wind. He's my best friend. We're a real solid team. About an hour after we started hiking along the valley ridge, we came to a gully that cut downhill through the ridge toward the river, which we'd have to cross. I picked a route down the steep rise to the dry, boulder-filled creek bed at the bottom of the gully, where a deer trail led back up the other side. Halfway down the slope, Reggie started acting real strange. He stopped about 30 feet in front of me, cocked his head to the side, and fixed his gaze down to our left, toward a spot in the dry creek bed as it dropped down the valley. He then leaned his head forward, as if trying to get a better view, and then started turning around toward me without pulling his eyes off the spot, which he really only does when he's scared of something, like when we go to the vet or I start up a chainsaw. Then he bolted up the steep side of the gully to where I was standing. "What is it, bud?" He kept switching his gaze from my eyes to the same spot below us while pacing around in half circles. Strange. My first thought was mountain lion, which I always have at the back of my mind. They're all over the place out here, but they usually clear out long before they let people, let alone a person with a dog, get this close to them. Figured that probably wasn't it. Whatever, I thought. We've got to cross this gully and keep moving. So I patted the dog on the head and kept on moving down toward the bottom of the gully. Reggie stayed right on my heels the entire time. The bottom of the gully was a dry creek bed loaded with car-sized boulders with a lot of rocks and gravel running between the rock formations and steep grassy walls of the gully. As I was crunching over the gravel, Reggie stopped in the middle of the creek bed and, once again, was fixated on something to our left down the gully. This time he dropped his spine and I could see his hackles raise. Oh shit, I thought. Maybe there really is some kind of predator in the rocks down there. I flipped the safety off my shotgun and started talking to Reggie in the cute buddy tone I use when I'm trying to calm him down. I started walking toward a big boulder in the middle of the creek bed that was blocking my view. Looked like once I was past it, I'd have a clear field of view over the entire gully, all the way down the valley side to the river. Reggie was still frozen in place. I patted his head as I passed on his right side. Once I got a few paces past him, I noticed he wasn't following me, which he usually would, even if it was a bear ahead of us. I looked back at him. "Let's go, bud. What's up there? Let's go get it." Usual comments I'd make to him to get him all jazzed and excited to go check out an area. He started pacing around in half circles again, with his ears back and his tail down. What the fuck? I thought. Definitely never seen him do this before, unless, again, we're at the vet and he doesn't like shots. I've seen him chase 400-pound black bears off my property and squabble with countless coyotes. He's not scared of much. This got me pretty anxious. I shouldered my shotgun and decided that before we keep moving, at this point, checking behind the boulder where something had the dog all tweaked out was a safe thing to do. I moved fast. In my experience, dealing with cougars and black bears, 99.9% of the time you bump into one, they're absolutely terrified and run away as fast as they possibly can, especially when surprised by something with confident movement that's making lots of noise. But definitely don't do this with a grizzly. I heard Reggie start following me as I started to boogie around the boulder. I came around the big rock on the right side, and in front of me was a big clearing in the creek bed and a huge big horned sheep, a ram no more than 25 feet in front of me. We run into a big horned sheep out in this country all the time, so it wasn't that much of a surprise. What was surprising was how this thing was sitting. That's the only way I can think to describe it. It was sitting on its folded back legs like a dog or a cat would, holding itself up with a straight-backed posture, front legs locked forward with its hooves in the gravel, staring straight ahead so I couldn't see its face. "What the fuck?" I said out loud. These are very wary and skittish animals. They'd never let a person get this close. A bunch of things went through my mind at the same time. Maybe it's dead. No, it was cold, and I could see steam coming from its slow breaths. Maybe it's wounded and dying? Maybe it's stuck on some old fencing or something. Right then, Reggie started barking. Not just barking, but snarl barking, like he was in a fight. He's a pretty quiet dog generally, and he never barks at deer, elk, or ram. Maybe prances after them for a few seconds instinctively, if we bump into one hiking, and spook it, but he's never been very interested in big mammals. It startled me. I looked back at him, and he had his front legs splayed out. His head was down. His tail was down. His hackles were raised up so high he didn't even look like an English setter anymore. And he was fully baring his teeth and barking and snarling like I've never seen before. He looked feral, like a coyote. I could hear the snap of his teeth as he barked again and again. I looked back at the ram, still just sitting there, unmoving, staring straight ahead. Now that was strange. I've never known a wild mammal to do anything but bolt away, terrified at the presence of a canine, let alone not even move a muscle with a canine being aggressive. I was pretty convinced at that point that the ram had to be real sick or super messed up in some way. Definitely close to death. Even if it was tangled up on something or had got trapped in a leg snare, it would be freaking the hell out with the dog going ballistic next to it the way Reggie was. "Reggie, here!" I yelled to him. Here is sort of my catch-all command for him, meaning, stop what you're doing and get to my heels right now. Reggie didn't even look at me. I took my shotgun in my left hand, turned and took a step toward the dog, and pointed at the ground in front of me, and pretty much screamed, "Reggie, here!" Again, nothing. He just kept barking and snarling at the ram with increasing intensity. That really put me on edge. He never just completely ignored a firm command before. It's like I wasn't even there. I turned back to the ram and shouldered my shotgun again. Something was wrong, real wrong. All my years spent in the back country, hunting and tracking big game animals. I mean, I literally guided ram hunts professionally just one valley over, and I'd never seen anything like this. The wind was picking up and howling down the gully. I felt its bite on my hands. The light dusting of snow from the night before was getting whipped up around the gully. Thin, frantic sheets and clouds of light snow that looked almost like electric bursts as the tiny ice crystals catch the light at different times. I started moving around the ram to its right, trying to gain some elevation to stay somewhat above it as I rounded its position to get a look at its face. Bighorn sheep don't attack people. They're skittish as hell, so I wasn't necessarily scared of that. But this thing seemed unwell, so I figured all bets were off. As I was sidestepping around it, the wind in the gully started messing with the pressure in my ears, as it can. Felt like I was landing in an airplane, and my ears popping slightly dulled the volume of Reggie's snarling and barking, and the wind howling down around the rocks. My heart was pounding pretty good at this point. I got to a spot around 8 feet directly to its right, and about 3 to 4 feet above it, up the slope of the gully, and could start to make out its face. My heart rate was going insane, uniquely so, to the point I actually noticed. The pressure change made it so I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my ears, and I feel it throbbing in my cheeks and eyes. Felt like I'd taken 10 Adderall, chugged a Red Bull, and then sprinted a mile. Trying to calm myself down and get a grip only made me more jumpy and anxious. I took another step and could see its mouth now. It was slightly agape, with milky snot running from its nose and saliva dripping from its bottom lip, with little spurts and flecks of both shooting out every time it exhaled a steamy breath. "What?" I kept saying out loud. I took another step and could start to see its eyes behind the big, full curls of its horns, which were pocked with scars and abrasions from a lifetime of battling other rams and existing in this hard, rocky country. I took another step, so I was able to essentially look at it from the front for the first time and see its full features. It had tears pouring out of its eyes, and it sounded almost like it was moaning. Alright, I thought. This thing is incredibly messed up. Is it a virus or something? Is its lower spine broken? I wanted to put it out of its misery, but shooting a bighorn sheep without a license is a felony with a $15,000 fine. So I started thinking about hiking back and calling the Fish and Game officers. I lowered my shotgun and was about to turn to go back toward the dog when it snapped its head up to the right and looked right at me. Until my last day alive, I will never forget that moment. All the wind was knocked out of me, or sucked out of me. It felt like I was free-falling, with my stomach in my throat. I couldn't move. I pissed myself. Just straight up urinated in my pants for the first time since I was a toddler. Tears started rolling out of my eyes down my cheeks. My hands and feet went numb. I didn't notice the dog move, but Reggie was suddenly right at my feet, with a strap for my backpack in his mouth, fiercely pulling on it as hard as he could, as though we were playing a tug-of-war, yanking me back the way I'd come. But I couldn't move. I couldn't raise my shotgun. I couldn't look away from the ram. I was stuck. Then the ram started weeping. That's the only way I can describe it. Weeping. It didn't move its body, only its head, but it was whimpering and weeping, like a person. Its facial features became very human. Its eyes bulged. Its bottom lip was quivering. It was whimpering out noises like it was trying to speak between sobs, while sucking in air sporadically, like a crying child would. Then, unmistakably, it started speaking, or more like it started pleading. It only used a total of 3 different words, but they were unmistakable. Don't go, don't go. Please don't go. Don't go, please don't go. Don't. It increased its intensity gradually, from a whimpering pleading to a desperate screaming. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was going to throw up, or had already thrown up. After what felt about 15 seconds, my dog finally yanked on my pack hard enough to get me to stumble, and I lost my footing. I couldn't move my leg to replace my foot, so I went down to one knee and then buckled forward down the slope, rolling onto a shoulder and finally breaking my eye contact with the ram. The second I broke eye contact with that thing, I could breathe again, and the sensation of falling went away. Reggie was whining and barking now, right in my face, licking my cheek between barks and snapping at the straps on my backpack shoulder straps and yanking on me away from where I'd fallen. I pushed myself up on my palms and just screamed, "Go!" to the dog and grabbed my shotgun and half sprinted, half crawled up the hill, out of the gully, as fast as I could. The ram's screaming was getting louder. It started to hurt my ears. Reggie was ahead of me, stopping every 20 feet or so to look at me and bark toward the noise. I could see the dog was shaking like a leaf. The screaming started to turn into a single, unbroken roar that sounded half beast and half wind. The pressure in my head was so bad that a throbbing reddish blackness flooded my peripheral vision, and I could barely see. I just kept crawling and scrambling toward my dog's barking, and eventually crossed the crest of the slope at the top of the gully and was on flat ground again atop the valley ridge. Right then, the roaring stopped. The wind died down and I felt the pressure in my head give way. The darkness faded from my vision, and the light of the day filled the world again. I stood up and jogged a short distance until a thirst like I'd never felt came over me. I collapsed at the base of a rock outcropping and called Reggie over. I took probably 25 gulps of water out of my camelback. I realized I'd thrown up all over myself at some point while scrambling out of the gully, or maybe before, and had a few deep cuts in my palms and knuckles. Reggie was still shaking like he'd just come out of an ice bath, and whining as though he was hurt. I checked him for injuries, but he seemed all right, so I gave him some water and put an arm around him, trying to calm him down just a bit. I wiped much of the dirt and snow-caked vomit off my coat as I could with my bandana, while keeping an eye and a shotgun barrel trained on the crest of the gully, expecting with a deep dread to see ram horns slowly coming over the crest. But they didn't. After a minute or so, I got my stuff together. I took another sip of water, stood up and booked it the entire 3 miles or so back to the truck, jogging the entire way. As soon as I could see my truck, I fumbled my keys out of my coat pocket, unlocked it, and bolted straight for the driver's side door. I threw the dog into the passenger seat, the gun into the back seat, and piled in behind the wheel without even taking my pack off, fired her up, and tore down the dirt road much faster than was safe. I got to the highway and didn't stop until we were in my driveway. It's been 2 weeks since that day, and I still haven't been able to sleep a full night or talk to anyone about it. The hell would I tell people without them thinking I've lost my mind? Reggie has never liked sleeping in my bed before, but he's curled up as close as he can to me every night since. I have no way to rationally explain what happened out there. I have no clue what it was controlling or possessing that animal. But I know one thing. It felt like there was a person in that ram, somewhere. It felt like a person's spirit was stuck in there and desperately wanted out. However, based on the way my dog was acting, I also got the gut feeling that if I did help it, I wouldn't have ever left that gully. I am sincerely terrified in a way I've never known possible. It was a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure I and my dad found a dead juvenile dogman in our barn. It was in the wintertime, and we had 2 barns on our property. One which my father would use, and another one on the far side of the property that was a little more out of shape. It desperately needed a new paint job and a lot of other things done to it. My father really never got around to it, so he just used it as storage and infrequently visited it. Our property was shaped more like a big rectangle. We had thick timber and fir all around our property line, except for the front, which sloped down to a dirt road that rounded around our house, followed by more clear land. The barn that acted as a large storage shed was a few hundred yards away from the house, near the woodline, kind of tucked away in the corner of the property. The other barn, our shed, chicken coop, was all on the other side of the property. This left us with really no reason to go out that way, unless my dad needed some specific things from the other barn. Sorry, I have to lay out the details for you first. So, this was in the wintertime, and I was helping my dad out in the storage barn, and he was clearing a bunch of old hay, because he was going to set one of his cars in there. It had been a brutally cold winter. Lots of snow and lots of ice. As we're clearing out the hay, we end up finding this thing. I don't know what you would call it. A dogman, I guess. It must have tried to find warmth in the old hay, and froze to death, I'm guessing. I'm not really sure how it died. That's just based on what I know now. As a kid, it really freaked me out. My dad just thought it was some strange animal, but it looked freaky. This thing looked to be the size of a child, but slightly larger than I. I was 8 years old at the time, and it was very humanoid looking. It was curled up in the fetal position. It had black leathery skin and black matted fur all over its back. It had human-like hands with long black claws on the ends of each finger. The feet were dog-like, and the legs had hocks in them, just like a dog did. It had a wolf-looking face that looked like it was in anguish when it died. Its muzzle was the scariest thing about it at the time. It had long rows of razor-bladed teeth that kind of curled backward a little bit. They were sharp. Its eyes had already rotted out, and it was much frailer than I would have expected. If this thing truly matches with any of the living descriptions of a creature of similar features, I would imagine it to be quite muscular. It wasn't uncommon for us to find dead animals like that in our barn that would either eat poison or freeze from the winter, but I had no idea what we were looking at. I kept asking my father what it was, and he just kept telling me to bury it. It will always stick with me for as long as I can remember. I'm here to basically act as a whistleblower on the wildlife management of Florida and Georgia State. I spent a lot of my free time in the national state parks, wildlife areas, and state forests. I hike for miles and miles, and I've come across over 6 dead black bears now. I've traveled through the John Bethia State Forest, up into Georgia, into the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, down into the Apalachicola National Forest, and of course, Tate's Hell State Forest. It's well known there is a thriving population of black bear here in the South, especially in Florida State, and there is nothing to my knowledge of the animal kingdom that kills them. Over the last year, in fact not even 12 months in my adventures, I've come across 6 carcasses of mangled, attacked, and bloody, beaten black bear. First time or two, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Now I'm certain something is killing these bears. I want to state that these bear carcasses I found were not small black bear either. These are full-grown adult males I'm talking about. I'm talking a good 400 to 450 pounds of black bear. I don't think we have wolves down here, so I can't say that's what it is, but these bears look like they've been attacked by a meat grinder. Chunks of their skin and flesh are missing, and they're soaked in blood and mangled up pretty badly. You'll never find these bodies on trails, only far off in the middle of nowhere like I have. When I go and adventure into these places, I go miles in, staying far away from trails to keep solitude. The bears that I find are generally by creeks, pastures, or other areas out in the open that would suggest they were attacked by something while vulnerable. The most alarming and bothersome thing I found was closer to Tate's Hell State Forest in northern Florida. I stumbled upon an area that looked to be a black bear den. It was a tiny cave that lowered into the ground with brush all around it. You can't see the front from the top, but once you come around, you can actually see that it leads down into this small, cavernous space. The smell is what got me first. I smelt death, came through the thicket, and saw blood. Climbing around and down allowed me to see what it was. This is just what I saw and what looked like happened. Something, I don't know what, pulled this black bear out of its den and ripped it in half. Its top half of its stomach was missing. Pieces of muscle, blood, tissue, and guts were pulled all over the place and partially decayed. There had already been maggots, so it could have happened a day or two prior. Remember, conditions down here for decay are highly more rapid than of the north with the heat, humidity, and all. I've never in my life seen a black bear ripped in half from the waist up. Part of its tattered spine and ribcage were partially exposed through the rotting bloody tissue and skin. I'll never forget such a horrid image. Looking down in the dirt, it looked like there was mass signs of what I would call struggle and chaos. Something went on. Looking around the bear, you can tell this thing struggled for its life and fought. Plants and dirt all around it were disturbed and ripped up. What rips the top half of a bear off and eats it? Looking around further, I found no signs of any more blood other than what was surrounding the dead half of the bear. There were no bones, nor any blood trails that would indicate a predator tore the bear in half and walked off with the other. I was flabbergasted and deeply concerned at what kind of animal or predator is out here doing this to bears. You don't have to believe me, but I'm telling you what I've seen and experienced. I'm blowing the whistle because people need to know about this. People need to know something is going on, and I believe the wildlife management know very well what's going on. I'm sure there are far more bodies, and I'm sure it's worse than we know. I doubt I'm the only one who has seen these dead black bear. "10 years ago, I worked as a security guard to a rather popular apple orchard in the state of Massachusetts. I won't name the name of the orchard, but it is a very popular one. I ended up quitting my security job because of this incident. I had already been there for a few months when this happened, so I was doing my nightly routine. I was patrolling the west area of the orchard when I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I kept seeing this large shape dart between the trees in the orchard. I thought somebody was trying to sneak around, so I quickly investigated and shone my light into the orchard. I didn't see anything at first, but then I thought I saw a shape that didn't look like it was supposed to be there. I started walking closer, saying out loud, 'I'm coming to you. I know you're there.' I take about another 2 to 3 steps, and this huge canine-like shape takes off bolting through the orchard. It was so loud, it sounded like 10 gorillas crashing through the woods, destroying several of the apple trees in the process. It all happened so fast that I wasn't able to get a great look at it, other than I knew I wanted to be as far away from that thing as possible. I was telling my boss about it, and even he thought I was just making it up. It scared the hell out of me. I think mainly because it was so huge, just such a massive shape. Whatever it was had to have been easily 500 plus pounds, and looked like it was crouching down. As it took off, I did get a decent view of the back, and could see what looked like cropped ears on top of his head, and a little bit of a side profile on the muzzle. Back in the late 90s, My roommate and I dabbled in black magic and summoning demons to do our bidding. Well, I should say my interest into the whole thing was very short-lived. In fact, I actually never made it that far, other than doing maybe one Ouija board session. My roommate, however, grew obsessive about it and got really involved in spells and furthering his skills, we'll call it. He always showed an interest in the dark arts before we dabbled in it, and he got serious about it. It got too much for me to deal with, and I ended up moving on afterwards, but I'll explain how it all started. So, my roommate and I had been friends for a while before we moved in together. We were both male, in our mid-20s with stable jobs while going to school full-time. We had been friends since the beginning of college. Not super close, but enough that with the given circumstances, we figured we'd be roomies and split the rent on a nice 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. Originally, he was renting it and had a different roommate. The roommate moved out, and it just so happened I was looking for a place at the time, and it worked. This would have been in June, I think because I just finished my spring trimester in my college. It was hot out too. Living there was not bad for the time being, and till around September-October, he kept bringing up the idea of spells and Ouija boards and controlling spirits. At first, I thought he was just messing around, but I realized he wasn't after he kept bringing it up. Then I thought he was crazy wanting to mess with that stuff. He brought home a Ouija board one day and convinced me to try it with him. On our first try, it actually worked. He led the session, and apparently, we came in contact with the original owners of the house from well over 100 years ago. It was a very old house. We ended the session and didn't really touch the Ouija board for another couple days, until I came home from class one night. He was in the living room, doing it himself, and talking to a spirit guide, is what he told me. He was asking the spirit guide about spells and how to control other entities. It really started to freak me out. I can't remember if it gave him direct answers because I didn't stay in the room. The following week, he bought a few different spell books and black magic ritual tutorials. He started casting spells in his room and other dark rituals. His personality started to change around this time and became much more reclusive. It went from him hanging out in the living room and visiting with me all the time to rarely ever seeing him. He would keep all the lights off in the house and stay locked away in his room. When I would get home and turn the lights on, I would hear him screaming at me from his room to turn them off. Of course, I screamed back and told him we need lights on. Anyway, when I would see him, he looked like he hadn't slept in days and began to look more frail and pale by the day. His behavior was really beginning to scare me. I don't remember the exact day, but I came home from class one day, and he was telling me we were going to have some nightly visitors, and that he had mastered a spell to summon night children, he referred to them as. Keep in mind, we're in a smaller house in a suburb, not too far away from college, so I don't know what he meant by this. I actually forgot all about it later on and fell asleep studying for a test. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night to a tapping on my window. I was startled awake and shot up because of the noise. I didn't have any curtains on my windows, so I could clearly see if anybody was outside my window. I turned my head, and looking at me outside my window was the scariest looking hyena thing I've ever seen. Its paw, or hand, whatever it was, pressed up against the glass, and this thing was grinning at me with glowing red eyes. It was dark, so I couldn't make out a lot of details of its fur, but it was terrifying looking. I didn't immediately think of any correlation between what I was seeing and my roommate. I quickly ran out of my room and hid in the bathroom, where I fell asleep on the toilet, waiting for this thing to disappear. I must have stayed asleep in there for a while, because I woke up and it was around 6 in the morning, and it was about time for me to get ready for school soon. My roommate wasn't home in the morning, and so I didn't see him again until that evening when I got home. He was sitting in the living room in the pitch black darkness. It was very strange. and he was really starting to disturb me. After I come in and turn on the light, I asked him why he was sitting in the dark. He ignored my question and without making eye contact said to me, "So, I heard you had a little run-in with one of my children." At first, I had no idea what the hell he was talking about, and then it clicked in my head. He then tells me that more will be coming, and he is controlling them to do harm to other students who have wronged him. At this point, I knew he was dangerous, but I didn't realize he was this crazy. I told him whatever, and we didn't speak for the remainder of the evening. Nothing happened that night, but as the nights continued on, I began feeling these things' presence come around. I was up late one of these nights, and my skin started to crawl, and my hair stood up. I just knew in my gut these things were outside of our house, and I didn't dare look out my window. Not even 5 minutes later, I hear my roommate outside talking. I don't know if he was talking to one of these things or what, but I couldn't make out what he was saying, just could hear his voice. This became a nightly occurrence. After a few more days of this happening, I stayed home for my morning class, and he came home from being out all night, doing God knows what. I approached him and told him he needs to knock this black magic stuff off and these creatures he's bringing around our house, and it needs to stop. He just laughed at me and went to his room and locked the door. I let him know the very next day I was going to be moving out, and he was on his own. This freaky shit has gotten way too out of hand, and it was too much for me. He never said a word during any of this. I moved out, and I guess he continued to stay there. In fact, I think he even got a new roommate on board, but I had no idea what that situation looked like. I kept my distance and stayed away from him, after all, and anyone he was friends with. I had friends saying that they were seeing freaky shit on campus though, especially at nighttime, and some friends claiming that they saw werewolves. I never said anything about what I saw because I don't know what it is I saw. I don't know if it was a demon or what the hell it was, but it scared me. After I finished college, I never came back in contact with him. Fast forward to 2006, and an old friend from college had heard through the grapevine that my old black magic roommate committed suicide back in 2004. Before I tell you this story, I would like to give you a little background information on me and the situation. I'm 39, and I have a wife, Taylor, who is 32. We have been married for almost 10 years now, and I have grown extremely close with her family. Particularly, her grandmother, Verla, who just passed away last year. Her grandmother was a very interesting character, had a very successful business, and plentiful amounts of wealth. She was quite the businesswoman from what I heard from her colleagues. Anyway, she owned a very large house that was plantation-styled in northern Kentucky. This huge plot of land featured acres and acres, as well as a barn and other stuff on the property. I mean, this is a huge house we're talking about. Maybe close to a mansion size, I don't know. We've known about it, but we've never actually been out there ourselves till this last year to see the house. We live in Northern California, and she would always come and visit us, so we never really had a reason to go out there. She was very close with my wife, and I as well. And, of course, from her passing, it was extremely difficult for both of us. She did leave a will, and it turns out that she actually left the house and her property to my wife in the will. We were astonished that she would do this, but she did leave huge sums of money for some of my wife's brothers and sisters. We flew out to Kentucky to check the place out since it was now in my wife's name. I know she was really wishy-washy about it, but I'm not sure she wanted to really go through with it. I thought about selling it, but she also thought about keeping it and us moving into it. It all depended on what the property looked like and how much work was going to be needed. Knowing Verla, she had the place pretty spot on and kept up on things really great. She didn't have any grandkids or anything like that, so the house stayed pretty immaculate. She was always kind of a clean freak though, even when she would come over. So, we get to northern Kentucky, and we go to check out this house. She lived pretty secluded. You had to take this long 2-lane road, and then onto this long dirt gravel road that would eventually lead you to her property. Her property itself was beautiful, with what I can only describe as big rolling pastures that went on and on, with the Kentucky wilderness all around. It was utterly breathtaking. She even had an older well on the property. The house itself was massive and had 5 or so bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, and a couple of additional bedrooms used for stuff, I guess. An attic and a basement were also included, and other various rooms that weren't being used or used to store only items. Again, there was a lot of rooms. It was a beautiful older home, and had a nice big wood stove in the kitchen that was used primarily for heating and cooking. I had big ideas in my head already to flip this thing and make a killing, since I had no desire to want to live in it. From we could tell right away that the house was in fairly good shape. My wife was very impressed with the house, but came to the same conclusion that maybe we should try and sell it versus abandoning our jobs back at home. We sat outside on the massive wraparound porch, talking about our plans and what we wanted to do. This was in the evening time, and at some point during our conversation, we began to hear strange vocalizations off in the woods next to us. My wife and I would exchange glances every time we heard these. They began to get more and more disturbing and strange. I'm no wildlife expert, but I'm pretty sure I've never heard an animal noise quite like this. It was like a guttural howl. It sounded so low, and whatever made the sound had to have quite the set of lungs. Then we would hear this really low growling sound. It was all around the woods around us. It made us uncomfortable, but it wasn't too out of control. The noise had stopped after a while, and we quickly forgot about it. We decided to do one more walk around the house, just to get a better feel for things on the outside. It was really starting to get dusk, so we weren't planning on staying too much longer. My wife began to notice weird things around the sides of the house. Huge tracks going back and forth around the house. Canine tracks specifically. Big ones. As she began to notice more and more, there was a bunch of them. This was weird because Verla was not an animal person at all, and in fact she was actually allergic to most pets, including cats and dogs. She lived pretty remotely, so we thought it was strange. There were also no neighbors within miles of her, so there's no reason any dogs at all should have been around her property. But there were multiple tracks and multiple sets of these prints. That's when my wife discovered that several of the basement windows had been broken all around the house. Where the windows were broken, there were a lot of these big canine tracks walking off into this spot. We both looked at each other. Is some big dog breaking into my wife's dead grandmother's house? I don't remember if I said it, but it was dusk at this point, and so it was starting to get darker and darker. I don't know if it was the sheer abnormality of the situation that caused our skin to crawl, but I could have sworn in that moment things around us got quiet. I began to feel really on edge, and I could tell my wife began to feel uncomfortable as well. I told her we'll just come back in the morning and look a little further. Up to this point, we had only done a quick walkthrough of the house. We didn't thoroughly search or anything. This will make sense in a second. So, we'd go back that night and would come back the following morning. Things seemed fairly normal. There's no noise from the woods, and all seems alive and well. Well, no weird noises, but we heard nature, of course. We looked onto the house and decided to search a little more thoroughly. If we were going to sell this thing, we wanted to make sure there wasn't anything out of place or anything cosmetically that we needed to fix. From the previous day, the broken windows in the basement could prove to be a problem, so we wanted to get down there and see what we could do to fix them. The great thing is that if we were to sell this place, we can really make a lot of money because it was such a beautiful piece of land. Thank you, Lord, that Verla did such an amazing job at keeping up on her house. We headed on down to the kitchen and into the basement, into a very massive basement, mind you. As soon as we opened the door, we're hit in the face with this stench of wet dog and urine. It's so thick it almost knocked us back on our feet. I remember my wife saying, "Oh God," as she's covering her face with her arm and walking down the stairs. Because it was an older house, the light to the basement was at the very bottom, so she just used her phone light to navigate down the stairs. I had followed closely behind her. Once we got to the bottom and turned the light on, we could see that the basement actually had a lot of room. There's the main basement room that we were in, and off to our left was a small room that looks like it could have been a wine cellar at some point. It had no windows in there. Off to our right was another small little hallway area that had a washer and dryer, and beyond that another room. The window in the room we were currently in was smashed inward, like something broken in. We didn't see any traces of hair or anything that would lead to somebody breaking in, but the stench of wet dog and urine was really bad. My wife and I chalked it up to some animal, probably a dog breaking in here and sleeping down here, even though it didn't add up at all with the tracks outside. It felt odd to even think about that because dogs don't act like that, nor do they behave in such a bizarre manner. The other weird thing was the basement windows were larger, but they were still about a 7-foot drop from the window to the ground. So how is the dog, if that's what it was, getting in and out of the basement? To our knowledge, nobody had been over at this house since she had died, which was about 5 weeks prior. This had to have been recent. We searched the other room with the window to see if there was anything we could find, and it was just more broken glass and that horrible, horrible stench. It gets even more weird though. After leaving the basement and spending more time looking throughout the house, I noticed that there was salt along every doorway upstairs and sage in every bedroom. I didn't really notice this before because I didn't take the time to pay attention, but it immediately struck me as weird. I'm no expert, but aren't lining doorways with salt and burning sage a way to ward off evil spirits? From what we knew, Verla was a hardcore atheist and thought everything of the spiritual manner was childish and make-believe. Why would she have this in her house? Plus the tracks outside the house and the weird noises during the day before the woods getting quiet. It was just too weird, and so we decided to call it a day and maybe get a realtor involved in helping us sell the place. I remember when we left, or I should say as we were leaving the house, I remember feeling very uncomfortable. On the drive back to the hotel, I was asking my wife if maybe Verla knew if there was the possibility of a poltergeist being in the house. But that doesn't explain the basement windows being busted inwards, like something had broken in and was living down there. Maybe they were two separate problems. I don't know, but it was weird. She agreed that the house kind of gave her weird vibes too, and not the good kind. The following day, we called up a local realtor and explained our situation, and she happily agreed to help us sell the house. We wanted her to go check out the place and get her opinion, so we scheduled the following day for her to come out with us and check the house out. We were supposed to be at the house that morning by 11 a.m., and we ended up getting stuck in traffic by about 20 minutes or so. So we're on our way there. I think it was around 11:15, and we get a phone call from the realtor. She sounded panicked and said we're going to have to find somebody else to help sell the house. She told us and asked us if we're aware that a big black dog was running around outside the house and ran after her to attack her. It scared her so bad. My wife and I were both thoroughly confused at what she was saying, but she was frantic and ended the call. Luckily, my wife's sister's husband was an investor and dealt with rental properties more than anything else. We got in touch with him and asked if he would be interested in helping us sell the house and splitting the profit, since my wife owned it now. He happily agreed and flew out to meet us. We had lunch, talked about the house and how much we were planning on selling it for. He offered to go check out the place and give us a good appraisal on the property. We trusted his judgment well since he knew the real estate game pretty thoroughly. We also informed them that a realtor that we just tried to work with was spooked off the property by some dog or so we warned him of that. He chuckled and went on his way. Well, we get a phone call from him about 3 hours after lunch, and the only thing he told us was that he's not helping us sell the house, that we're on our own. My wife and I are furious at this point and demand answers, but he refused to answer any questions and just said he's never going anywhere near that house again and that we need to stay away from it too. Exhausted, frustrated, and confused, we had no idea what the hell to do. The whole house selling process was very confusing and we were very new to it. We needed help, but everybody seemed to keep giving up on us, so my wife just decided to hold on to the house for a little bit longer and determine later on how we're going to sell the damn thing. My wife still is holding on to that property, and we've gone back a couple of times with some crazy things happening to us. Although, because there's so many things that happened, I'm not going to write it all out in one email, so I may send you more of that later. But for now, this is the gist of our situation with this house. We can't get rid of it, and there's some sort of crazy things going on with that property. I work for a county cleanup crew in Mississippi. I won't say which county because my name is known around here, and I don't want to receive any flack for telling you guys this. I do many different things for the county, but I've gone on the cleanup crew a few times. Let me explain to you what I mean by the cleanup crew. I'll go through some of the more rural highways and areas with a lot of critter traffic and clean up roadkill. Whole lot more to say than that. One day, I was doing my route by myself. It was a long highway that really goes out there in the country. This area is notorious for roadkill, such as squirrels and skunks. Deer a lot of times too, but not as much. We get a lot of other critters like possums and raccoons, but they're all amongst the bunch. In my time doing this, I've come across several carcasses of deer that are torn to pieces. I don't mean just ripped open and eaten. I'm talking literally ripped open and guts torn out and thrown everywhere. It's a mess. The only meat that is being eaten is by the flies and maggots. What I think happens is that some of these deer get hit by trucks and get knocked onto the side of the road, and then perhaps some large bear or other predator comes and does this to the deer. Only problem is, what kind of predator doesn't eat the meat, but instead rips up the carcass? Well, I would find that out in just a few months. I was driving home and it was in the evening time, so it was already dark. I actually lived not too far away from some of the highways I'm assigned to clean up. Upon coming up a rather large hill was a dead deer in the other lane of the road, as well as this monstrous wolf-looking person or thing, and it was crouched down, just like a person would. It was ripping the meat off the bone. I came upon the hill, saw the scene in front of me, but didn't slow down or speed up. I just kept driving, and I took it in all at once. Whatever this animal was never looked up at me or cared to notice me, but in the 3 seconds I saw everything that I did, it was ripping the skin off the carcass and had what appeared to be blood all over its hands and chest. I didn't really see the face, but it looked very coyote-like. It was gray-looking and slender. It wasn't huge, but it looked to be about as big as me and you. I have never quite heard of an animal like this, but I dismissed it and kept driving. It wasn't until later on that I pieced it together once I found another deer carcass that looks like the same thing, and wondered if it was from this animal. I had begun asking around my area if anybody had seen a creature like the one I saw, and, of course, I was either laughed at or told I was crazy. That's when I knew I was onto something. Whatever I saw didn't scare me, but it did intrigue me, because I didn't know those kinds of things can exist. It certainly seems like it would possess incredible killing power. I was curious. I really wanted to do some heavy research and dig up what I could. Unfortunately, not a lot turned up, but then I stumbled upon the keyword Dogman and started reading encounter after encounter and stories. I've heard everything from the bodybuilder, pitch black looking dogman, to the more hyena looking dogmen, to even the coyote skinny kind of dogmen. The whole phenomenon is really interesting, and I'm not sure if these creatures are regional or what the deal is, but now it does make sense, and I do believe I saw one of these things.